The Highland Bagpipe, its history, literature, and music, with some account of the traditions, superstitions, and anecdotes relating to the instrument and its tunes. By W. L. Manson, 1901. Chapter 2. Harpers, Bards, and Pipers. Opening quotation. O'er all this hazy realm is spread a halo of sad memories of the dead, of mournful love tales, of old tragedies, filling the heart with pity and the eyes with tears that bear remembrance, and old songs of love's endurance, love's despair, love's wrongs, and triumphs o'er all obstacles at last, and all the grief and passion of the past. Chapter heading: Ancient musical instruments, priestly harpers, hereditary harpers, Irish versus Scottish harpers, royal harpers, use of harp universal, Welsh sarcasm, Mary Queen of Scots harp, the last of the harpers, the Harper of Mull, from harp to pipes, the Clarsach, pipes supplanting bards, the last clan bard, Bardic customs, Bard's jealousy of pipes, the bard in battle, Duncan Ban Mac Intyre, two pipers scared, when the pipes became paramount, the fiery cross, the Coronach. The harp was the immediate predecessor of the pipes, but in ancient times, and also contemporary with the harp, there were other instruments. The Complaint of Scotland, written in 1548, speaking of a company of musicians, says, "The first had one drone bagpipe, the next had one pipe made of one bladder and of one reed, the third played on one trump, the fourth on one cornapipe, the fifth played on one pipe made of one great horn, the sixth played on one recorder, the seventh played on one fiddle, and the last on one whistle." We cannot speak as to quality, but there was evidently no lack of quantity in these days. The horn of battle was used by the ancient Caledonians to call their armies together. The cornu was blown by the Druids and their Christian successors, and St. Patrick is represented as carrying one. Ancient writers, indeed, lay particular stress on the musical ability of the Celtic priesthood, the members of which they describe as possessing extraordinary skill as harpers, taking prominent part with their instruments in religious ceremonies. The cornu, in its rudest form, was a cow's horn, and could sometimes be heard at a distance of 6 miles. The Irish Celts had various other instruments, but the harp was their favorite, both in Scotland and Ireland. The Hyperboreans, who are believed to have been the aborigines of Britain, were celebrated performers on the harp, accompanying their hymns with its music, and harpers were hereditary attendants on the Scottish kings and the Highland chiefs, from whom they had certain lands and perquisites. The cultivation of harp music reached the highest level in Scotland, the players beating their masters, the Irish harpers, although the class were more honored in Ireland than in Scotland. In Ireland none but a free man was allowed to play the harp, and it was reckoned a disgrace for a gentleman not to have a harp and be able to play it. The royal household of Scotland always had a harper, whose rank was much higher than that of the ordinary servant, and the kings even were not above playing. James I of Scotland, who died in 1437, was a better player than any of the Scottish or Irish harpers. In Scotland, however, the use of the harp ceased with the pomp of the feudal system, while in Ireland the people retained for many generations an acknowledged superiority as harpers. It has been claimed for the harp that it is, or at least was, the national instrument of Scotland. It is admitted that most of the Highland chiefs had harpers, as well as bards, and that their music was esteemed as of no small moment. In several old Highland castles, the harper's seat is still pointed out. Harps are mentioned in Ocean, but not pipes. There is a field in Mull called the Harper's Field, a window in Duntulm Castle called the Harper's Window. It is a matter of history that Donald, Lord of the Isles, was killed at Inverness by his own harper, after the misfortune which followed his incursion into Athol, and there are many other references which prove the universal use of the instrument. But we have very few traces of itinerant harpers in the Highlands resembling those of Ireland and Wales. In Wales it was the acknowledged national instrument. The pipes were known for some centuries, but the Britons never took too kindly to them, a famous poet comparing their notes to the shrill screech of a lame goose caught in corn, or a horrible, noisy, mad Irishman. Weakness in the use of metaphor was evidently not a characteristic of Welsh poetry at this date. In Wales they esteemed skill in playing on the harp beyond any kind of learning. But somehow the instrument never got the same hold on the national life of Scotland. If it had, it would not have been supplanted so easily as it was. When the pipes actually superseded the harp in Scotland, it is hardly possible to discover. We read that when Mary, Queen of Scots, made a hunting expedition into the wilds of Perthshire, she carried a harp with her, and that same harp is still in existence. That John Garvey MacLean of Cole, who lived in the reign of James VI, was a good performer, and that once upon a time an English vessel was wrecked on the island, and that the captain, seeing this venerable gentleman with his Bible in his hand and a harp by his side, exclaimed, "King David is restored to the earth," and that the last of the harpers was Murdoch MacDonald, harper to MacLean of Cole. MacDonald received his learning from another celebrated harper, Rowry Doll, or Blind Roderick, harper to the Laird of MacLeod, and afterwards in Ireland. And from accounts of payments made to him by MacLean, still extant, he seems to have remained in the family till the year 1734, when he went to Quinish in Mull, where he died in 1739. This Murdoch MacDonald was the musician who was immortalized by Tannahill as the Harper of Mull. The story which inspired this song is quite romantic, and will bear repetition. The following abridgment is from Mr. P. A. Ramsay's edition of Tannahill's poems. In the island of Mull there lived a harper who was distinguished for his professional skill, and was attached to Rosie, the fairest flower in the island, and soon made her his bride. Not long afterwards he set out on a visit to some Low Country friends, accompanied by his Rosie and carrying his harp, which had been his companion in all his journeys for many years. Overtaken by the shades of night, in a solitary part of the country, a cold faintness fell upon Rosie, and she sank, almost lifeless, into the harper's arms. He hastily wrapped his plaid round her shivering frame, but to no purpose. Distracted, he hurried from place to place in search of fuel to revive the dying embers of life. None could be found. His harp lay on the grass, its neglected strings vibrating to the blast. The harper loved it as his own life, but he loved his Rosie better than either. His nervous arm was applied to its sides, and ere long it lay crackling and blazing on the heath. Rosie soon revived under its genial influence, and resumed the journey when morning began to purple the east. Passing down the side of a hill, they were met by a hunter on horseback, who addressed Rosie in the style of an old and familiar friend. The harper, innocent himself, and unsuspicious of others, paced slowly along, leaving her in converse with the stranger. Wondering at her delay, he turned round, and beheld the faithless fair seated behind the hunter on his steed, which speedily bore them out of sight. The unhappy harper, transfixed with astonishment, gazed at them. Then, slowly turning his steps homeward, he, sighing, exclaimed, "Fool that I was to burn my harp for her." It is said that Tannahill first heard this story at a convivial meeting as an instance of the infidelity of the fair sex, whose fidelity he had been strenuously defending, notwithstanding that he himself was disappointed in the only love affair in which he was ever seriously engaged. The impression which the narrative made upon his mind led him to the composition of the song. When Rosie was faithful, how happy was I! Still gladsome as simmer, the time glided by. I played my harp cheery, while proudly I sang, O the charms o' my Rosie, the winter nights long. But now I'm as woeful can be, come simmer, come winter, it's all one to me. For the dark gloom of falsehood, say clouds my sad soul, that cheerless for aye is the Harper o' Mull. I wander the glens and the wild woods alone. In their deepest recesses I make my sad moan. My harp's mournful melody joins in the strain, while sadly I sing o' the days that are gane. Though Rosie is faithless, she's no the less fair, and the thought o' her beauty but feeds my despair. With painful remembrance my bosom is full, and weary o' life is the Harper of Mull. As slumbering I lay by the dark mountain stream, my lovely young Rosie appeared in my dream. I thought her still kind, and I ne'er was sae blest, as in fancy I clasped the fair nymph to my breast. Thou false fleeting vision, too soon thou wert o'er, thou wakedst me to tortures unequalled before. But death's silent slumbers my grief soon shall lull, and green grass wave o'er the Harper of Mull. The transition from the harp to the bagpipe was spread over about 2 centuries. In 1565, George Buchanan speaks of the Highlanders using both instruments, and during the 17th century, the use of the harp declined to such an extent that the number of professional harpers was very small indeed. The civil wars largely accounted for this, as the fitness of the bagpipe for the tumult of battle gave it an easy superiority over the harp. Writing at the beginning of the 18th century, Alexander MacDonald, the Keppoch bard, said he preferred the pipes to the harp, which he called Ceol Neonach, maiden's music. When the bards thus openly avowed their liking for the pipes, the transition period was over, for the harp was wont to be their favorite instrument. The harp still exists as the Clarsach, which is being revived by Highland associations, more especially in Glasgow. But, if the Irishism may be permitted, the bagpipe is now the harp of the Gael. Besides supplanting the harp, the pipes also supplanted the bards themselves. The bards were, in their day, a more important body of men than the harpers, and naturally much more relating to them has come down to posterity. They existed from the remotest period of which there are any records, and it was only in 1726 that, with the death of Neil MacVoirich, the Clan Ranald bard, the race of distinctively clan bards became extinct. The race continued to exist, bards exist to this day for that matter, but not as clan bards, and after 1726 they were only public makers of verse. The bards, like the harpers, though to a greater extent, wandered from house to house, keeping alive among the people the memories of their wrongs, celebrating the valor of their warriors, the beauty of their women, and the glory of their chiefs. The calling was held in such high esteem that after the fall of Druidism it was maintained at the expense of the state. The bards, however, became so numerous, overbearing, and extortionate that they lost favor. Many of them were killed by their enemies, and those left, shorn of their pride, but retaining their skill, occupied honorable positions in the retinues of their chiefs. In the heyday of their glory, the bards summoned the clans to battle, and they moved about among the men inciting them to deeds of valor, their own persons being held as inviolable by friend and foe. The leaders looked to them to inspire the warriors, just as at the present day pipers are expected to supply enthusiasm to the regiment when on the eve of battle. The bard exhorted the clans to emulate the glory of their forefathers, to hold their lives cheap in the defense of their country, and his appeals, delivered with considerable elocutionary power and earnestness, always produced a profound effect. When the pipes began to be used, they took the place of the bard when the din of battle drowned his voice. And after the battle was over, the bard celebrated the praises of the brave who had fallen and the valor of the survivors, while the piper played plaintive laments for the slain. The bards themselves did not always fight. They thought they were of more value as bards than as fighters. At the Battle of Inverlochy, Ian Lome, the Lochaber bard, and the most celebrated of the race, was asked to share in the fighting, but declined. "If I go along with thee today, Sir Alastair," said he, "and fall in battle, who will sing thy victory tomorrow?" "Thou art in the right, John," said his chief. "Let the shoemaker stick to his last." Ian Lome, however, is acknowledged to have been a brave man, and his attitude on this occasion is not considered a reflection on his character. The bard, especially if he were also a musician, was always in great request at social functions, and in the absence of books he constituted the local library. The class had naturally exceptional memories, and they became walking chroniclers of past events and preservers of popular poetry and everyday history. They did not welcome the pipes with any degree of enthusiasm. Instead, some of them used all their arts to throw ridicule on the newer instrument. Ian MacCodrum, the North Uist bard, 1710 to 1796, composed a satire on the bagpipe of one Domnul Ban, or fair-haired Donald, which is exceedingly humorous and sarcastic, and in the course of which he says, "It withered with yelping, the 7 Fenian battalions," whatever they were. Then, he continued, the Gael loved the pipes as Edinburgh people loved tea, although the pipes had weakened for the first time the strength of Diarmid and of Gaul. The last bard known to have acted officially in battle was Macmurroch, or Macmurroch, the Clan Ranald bard of the day, who recited at the Battle of Harlaw in 1411. Macmurroch was disgusted at the growing popularity of the pipes, and composed a set of verses descriptive of the bagpipe and its lineage, which are more graphic, humorous, and forcible than elegant or gentlemanly. Duncan Ban Mac Intyre, the bard of Glenorchy, has a poem on Hugh the Piper, who, it seems, had insulted the bard in some way. Hugh is compared to a wicked dog barking at the passers-by, and intent on biting their heels. He is to be hurled out of the society of bards and pipers as a fruitless bough is cut away from a flourishing tree. It is hinted that if he would quit the country, it would be a good riddance. He is made the impersonation of all sorts of defects, and his musical efforts are compared to the cries of ducks, geese, and pigs. It should be added, however, that the same bard composed Ben Dorain, the most famous of his poems, to a pipe tune, dividing it into 8 parts corresponding to the variations of the pibroch, and moulding the language into all the variations of the wild rhythm. So his spite must have been more at Hugh himself than at his music. The antipathy of the bards to the pipes is easily understood. They had all along been the acknowledged inspired leaders of the people, inciting the clans to battle with their wild verses. The pipes, with all their war spirit, could hardly match this, which is culled from a battle song supposed to have been written on the eve of the invasion of England that terminated so tragically at Flodden. "Burn their women, lean and ugly. Burn their children, great and small. In the hut and in the palace, prince and peasant, burn them all. Plunge them in the swelling rivers, with their gear and with their goods. Spare, while breath remains, no Saxon. Drown them in the roaring floods." Neil Macmurroch, the bard already mentioned, had been at a bard's college in Ireland, and brought back to his father's house not only stores of knowledge, but also the smallpox. Afflicted with the disease, he lay on a bed near the fire, where John and Donald MacArthur, 2 of the famous race of pipers, came in, and sitting down in front of his bed, began tuning their pipes. The discordant sounds raised the bard, and he, bursting with indignation, started railing at the pipes in a poetical and mock genealogy of the instrument. The poem itself is presentable in Gaelic, but in English it would be too much for the average reader. It emphasizes strongly the bard's aversion to the pipes, comparing them and their music to many ridiculous things in nature and art. The pipers, who had intended to make the house their quarters for the night, were startled by the fierce invective coming from behind them, and on looking round and seeing the swollen and marked face of Neil worked up into extraordinary excitement, terror took hold of them, and they fled in consternation. The bard's father evidently sympathized with his son, for he waited patiently until the poem was ended, and then exclaimed, "Well done, my son! Your errand to Ireland has not been in vain." When the pipes became paramount is about as difficult to determine as when they first threatened the position of the harp. They seem to have existed alongside the harp and the Coronach and the fiery cross for a considerable time, as we have referenced to all these in the literature of the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries. John MacLeod of Dunvegan, who lived about 1650, had a bard, a harper, a piper, and a fool, all of whom were most liberally provided for. We have got a blind harper, Rowry Doll, harper to MacLeod of Glenelg, and a blind piper, Ian Doll, piper to Mackenzie of Glairach, each of whom excelled in his own sphere, and both of whom flourished about 1650, while, as we have seen, the bards and the pipers were often at loggerheads. The pibroch did not supersede the fiery cross at all. for so long as the chiefs found it necessary to call the clans together, the goat was killed with the chief's own sword, the cross was dipped in the blood, and the clansmen sent round. The last battle at which a bard recited was fought in 1411. The last clan bard died in 1726. The last clan harper died in 1739, when the hereditary pipers were in all their glory. The fiery cross was last used in 1745, when it travelled 36 miles through Breadalbane in 3 hours, and the Coronach was superseded gradually by the lament of the pipes. The Bards ceased to live as an order on the accession of the kings of Scotland to the British throne, and there were no means provided at the Reformation for educating ministers or teachers for the Gaelic-speaking part of the country. But all through the centuries covered by the dates given, there were pipers. There are pipers still, not indeed clan pipers, but the class are recognized as peculiarly belonging to the Highlands, while harpers and bards have gone completely under in the great social revolution through which the Highlands have passed.